Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Great. I'll take the segue, Greg, at this point, and move into a couple of news items. But before I do that, I think that your positioning of the sort of, Yellow Pages in the mid 2000s, say, and now it's these sort of scaled SaaS platforms that Google is eager to partner with them. I think has been the case, kind of all the way along when it comes to reselling Google Ads or getting information, out of these companies' customer bases. I think the difference is, unlike the Yellow Pages, these SaaS companies that Google is partnering with have a much more defensible position, that there's not really the same kind of end around that there could have been with Google Ads and the Yellow Pages, several years ago. It's not like Google Merchant Center is displacing the table stakes necessity of managing online inventory in your Shopify website or your, or the table availability in your Talk Squarespace platform. So I think that these SaaS companies have a much more defensible business position than the Yellow Pages and arguably the media companies did in the first wave of this in the late 2000s. So that was interesting to me, Greg, to hear that positioning. The segue is, we saw Klaviyo this week raised, I don't know what it was, even hundreds of millions more dollars in funding.
I think it was like
$320 million, right?
Something.
This is a week after ActiveCampaign raised a very similar number, and we saw MailChimp this week come out with at least it was new to me, and I follow MailChimp relatively closely, the ability to make online ordering and appointment scheduling through MailChimp. So
would you tell listeners what Klaviyo is or does?
So Klaviyo, so that's what I was getting there. Good segue again, Mike. So it strikes me that these SaaS platforms are really becoming sort of all-in-one operations and marketing automation, which is how I would describe Klaviyo, as essentially marketing automation for e-commerce, and that they're almost like we've at least some of us have talked for years about the need for SMBs to implement some sort of CRM, whether that's just a spreadsheet or through a complex system like HubSpot. And it strikes me that these platforms are kind of going around the need for a traditional CRM by just starting with the very base, in MailChimp's case, in Klaviyo's case, and Shopify by default, and other e-commerce platforms. You're getting their customer information as a starting point and then building out features from there, as opposed to the other way around.
And Square's been doing that for a long time.
Square's doing the same thing. So it's just a really interesting time. We're sort of seeing the traditional website builders move into sort of operations and automation. We're seeing email marketing providers like MailChimp and ActiveCampaign moving more into websites and operations. And it just feels like, and we're seeing that investors are kind of buying the story as well, with the hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in. So I think it's an interesting time. And I think, as I said, unlike the Yellow Pages days that you highlighted, I think all of these companies have built pretty good products with a compelling value prop. And I think the differentiation is going to be really the hard part for all these companies, because the feature sets are largely available in all these platforms.
I like to think about it as sort of pre-sale, discovery, in-store operations, and then post-sale customer relations follow-up. And you're right, all those areas, whether they started with operations and moved out to marketing and follow-up, or started in follow-up like email and then moved out to marketing, they're all taking on many more functions.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, because in general, I think that small businesses, to paint with a broad brush, would prefer to work, I mean, this is what the survey data reflect, would prefer to work with fewer rather than more companies. So they don't want a bunch of point solutions. So just some of this evolution is responding to that perceived demand. Also to create more value, so retention is, churn is harder. It's a very, I mean, there's a much longer discussion about sort of the evolution of the small business SaaS marketplace, but it's really fascinating. I think some of the big money coming at these companies is post-COVID. Now everybody buys e-commerce or digital commerce and so people are scrambling for providers, and the market sort of perceives a much larger opportunity now, I think, than in the past.
And I think you're right. Just to close, I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, the surveys, for as long as we've all been in this business, have shown the preference for working with a single vendor. I think the difference is, historically, point solutions have been so much better breed than the all-in-one offerings have been. You would have been shooting yourself in the foot to choose a substandard all-in-one package. And now we're seeing, I mean, pretty much every company I just mentioned has a really great best-of-breed solution that is now available as an all-in-one. So I think that's the difference. And to some extent, the funding from these huge venture rounds has enabled these companies to invest in their product to that extent. So
that seems like a very optimistic close.
I would agree. Greg, are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that. So
all right,
we can close on that upbeat note. But anyway, as always, thank you for listening. Give us feedback and suggestions about how we can make what we're doing more interesting or more useful to you. And have a good week, whatever it is for you.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.